Hi guys, my name's Vanessa Smedley and I'm a painter. Well, today we are going to have a little bit of fun because I have just purchased, or rather my husband purchased for me, some Derwent Graphitint Pencils, and they are a water-soluble tinted graphite. So they're kind of like a cross between a watercolor pencil and a regular pencil. So it should be a lot of fun. So we're going to paint this nice little horse right here. Used to paint horses all the time when I was a little kid, so it should be a lot of fun. So let's do this. These things have been around for a long time. I'm just late to the party, so I'm just going to show you how to use them real quick, but I'm not going to swatch out every color because there are plenty of videos on YouTube where you can find just that. So I'm just going to show you how to use them real quick. So here is actually how you use this. You just put as much pigment on there as you want, and then you can drag it out a little bit further if you want to where it's like lighter. But you then grab your paintbrush with some water on it, or a water brush, whichever you prefer, and you just use it like a pencil, or I mean a watercolor pencil. Like that. You just activate it with water just like any other watercolor pencil. All right, so here are the swatches if you actually want to see them. You've got one color that's kind of reddish, you've got some purples, blues, greens, browns, a whole lot of grays, but you don't have any yellow. So that is kind of a little bit of a bummer. It's a little bit difficult to work around that, especially seeing as how it's a primary color, but I'm sure there's a reason for it. All right, so here we go. I've already transferred my drawing to my watercolor paper. So the first color that I've picked up is Ivy, which is kind of a vivid green. And what I'm doing is just laying down kind of an even coat all over the entire top half of the background. And I'll come back in with some other colors to give it some more variation, because this is all vegetation and trees and stuff in the background. Now that I have a very light, even coat of that, I'm coming back in with the same color and I'm making it darker in certain areas to give some variation in tone. And then I'm going to come back in with the slate green and we'll darken some areas and mix it to form different colors of green. And this is where that slate green comes in right here. I'm not placing it over every place that I used the ivy green in the darker areas, but I am like darkening and deepening the shadows. Now that I've got it all covered, I'm going to go ahead and begin activating this. So I have a number 12 round brush that's already wet, and I'm beginning to wet the entire area and kind of move it around. I'm trying not to just make it into one big mess, so I'm really trying to leave all of that pigment where it is in the darker areas and just keep the light areas light. We can come back in with more detail later, but for now I'm just trying to leave the pigment where I laid it. I'm also wiping my brush often so that I don't carry too much pigment from one place to another. For the much lighter grass area, I am just activating that tiny little bit of pigment that I put in there. Alright, so after that dried, I decided that it needed more variation, so I'm coming back in with my slate green and I'll begin to add in some more colors as well, because I want this both darker and more varied. It's time for fun facts, and this horse is a chestnut horse, which refers to the beautiful red coloring of its coat. I also threw in some green gray for just a little bit more variation as well. And we're going to go ahead and activate all of that as well, and I am being very careful to not get it on my horse because this stuff, it does lift but not very well, so you definitely do not want to get it on white areas that you don't want. I possibly should have masked this off, but I didn't take the time to do that. While all of that is drying, I'm going to begin to work on the horse. So on his forehead here, he has a white stripe going down the front. I believe that's called a blaze from my old horse days. And I'm beginning to use the color Chestnut here on his face. I'm trying to kind of do it a little bit uniform right now. We'll come back in with shadows and more detail later. Another fun fact for you is that Man o' War and Secretariat, which were two of the most famous racehorses in U.S. history, were both chestnut. And also, over half of the horses inducted into the American Quarter Horse Hall of Fame, as of 2011, have been chestnut. Now I'm going to make it darker in some areas that I want the shadow to be, like the musculature on his neck and underneath the jaw and that kind of stuff. Now I've changed to cool brown and I'm adding that underneath his eye and in the darker parts of the shadows. Now I've switched to Midnight Black and I'm adding that lightly in the nose area and then darkening it up as it's in the shadow areas, like in his nostril and in the crack of his mouth. It's now time to gingerly begin to activate this color. So I have a number 8 round brush and I'm beginning to use water to activate all of this color. And again, I'm trying not to move too much of the color around at this point because I don't want it to become a muddy mess for later. I did notice that as I was doing the neck here, it kind of was a large area and it made it very difficult to not have blooms because it would be drying as I was trying to get it all covered. So it is kind of patchy a bit, and that could be total user error, but I noticed that as I was doing that, it was blooming quite a lot. As I get to the mane, he has some very light areas close to his actual neck. And so I'm kind of painting around those to leave those light areas there for some variation in his mane, just making sure not to cover it up with all of that pigment. I've allowed all of that to dry and now I'm coming back in with the color Autumn Brown, which is, to be honest with you, a very, very red tone. It's kind of like, quite a bit like a burnt sienna, but this horse is quite chestnut, so it does have a lot of reddish tone to it. So I'm just going to go ahead and add that color in here. Since we have a dry layer, this is where I'm adding in some more of the contours of the body, because if I had done this before I activated the color, I think it kind of all would have gotten quite lost and it all would have become like a big muddy mess and you wouldn't have had any definition at all. But now that there's a base layer there that's already dried is when you can bring in some more of the detail. And now I'm bringing in some more of the cool brown to try to deepen the shadows. I did mention that when I was a little kid, I used to draw horses all the time, and I'm not joking, I drew horses all the time. In fact, when I was around 5 years old or so, maybe 6, I used to write my own books, quote unquote, about horses and illustrate them as well. Now, none of these books survive to this day that I'm aware of, so I am unable to confirm or deny their literary merit. And again, with the mane, it definitely needs to be darker behind these lighter areas so that they stand out some more, so I'm making sure and drawing around them. Now I'm going to go on another round of activation. Since we kind of have zombie horse going on here, it's time to add in the eyeball. So I have the midnight black and I'm going ahead and filling that in really quick. And while I'm at it, I'm just going to go ahead and darken in some more details and do some more modeling. You definitely want to activate this midnight black for the eyeball because it kind of takes on that graphite shininess if you don't, and it doesn't look as dark. Then I'm just activating some areas that I added in earlier, and I'm not going to activate every single bit of this because I do like the graphite look, because after all, that is kind of the point of this medium, is to leave some of that sketchy graphite look to it. I think the grass area needs to be darkened up a little bit, so I'm using a combination of all of my greens and a tiny little bit of the cool brown to darken this up. And then I go ahead and activate it. I'm finished with the Graphitint part of this, but I'm bringing in a Posca pen to add back in some white highlights in certain areas. I always feel like white highlights cause the entire thing to pop and to come alive. And here's the finished sketch, and in order to get an accurate representation of the color, I did have to turn off all of my normal studio lights so that the graphite wouldn't shine back and make it too light. All right, so I mean, if you look at this paper is almost too rough. Like, you can see that, like, you cannot get just tiny details in there because the paper is so rough and the graphite just kind of hits the hills of that paper. It almost looks better on this practice test that I did here with the hot press paper. This is Fabriano cold press, and then this is Arch's hot press, and I kind of like the look of that better in some ways. In other ways I don't, because like, look how much more vibrant the colors are on this one as opposed to this one. I don't know, it's almost like there needs to be halfway in between texture for these two papers. Maybe you do it on a cellulose paper. I mean, I can't believe I'm saying that since I hate cellulose paper so much usually, but for this kind of thing it might be just right. Also, I do want to say really quick that these pencils have been rumored to not be very light fast, meaning that they fade really bad. So you might want to keep that in mind when you're talking about finished artwork that you might hang or perhaps sell. That might not work out very well for you in the long run, so you might want to keep an eye on that. So maybe just use them for sketching because they are a lot of fun to mess with. However, they've also been rumored to not be very light fast even in a closed sketchbook where the light can't get to them. So you might want to keep in mind whether or not you would be annoyed if your sketches just suddenly disappeared sometime down the line. So don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, all of that fun stuff, because that's how this channel gets to grow. Thanks for watching. I will see you again in 2 weeks.